There is no readiness to talk about ending the war and making decisions, which means there is a lack of political will, which means Russia does not feel that it needs to end this war, which means there is not enough political, economic and other pressure on the Russian Federation. And that is why we are asking, if there is no ceasefire, if there are no serious decisions, if there are no bilateral meetings, we are asking for appropriate sanctions that will serve as an incentive for a faster end to the war, or at least speed up our discussions about this. We want a strong package of sanctions, which was mentioned recently. In the past few weeks, there has been a lot said about this by the USA, Russia, and Ukraine. Secretary of State Rubio is present. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey is present. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is present. Where is the corresponding person from the Russian Federation? This is disrespect not just towards Ukraine, but towards everyone, primarily towards Turkey, because the meeting is being held here.
Zelensky was making some statements demanding that Putin appear in person. Well, he's a pitiful man, but everyone understands this except perhaps for himself and those who are pulling his strings. Then his senior comrades explained to him that he shouldn't behave so foolishly and that negotiations are necessary. By the way, over the past 3 or 4 days, the West has somehow pushed the word ceasefire into the background. We explained in great detail that, by the way, Macron was asked, he gave some interview here 3 days ago, and he was asked, and he said, negotiations are needed, a meeting is needed, but everything must be done so that the main thing is a ceasefire. And Ukraine should approach the negotiations from a position of strength. Here's a straightforward answer. It's a frank admission. Why is a ceasefire needed? So that Ukraine can be built up, so that it can prepare to negotiate at some point from a position of strength. But Macron was told, that this is not what it's about right now. The Americans supported our president's proposal. We need to give negotiations a chance. No one can guarantee that everything will go.
So the clown show in Istanbul continues with the Ukrainian delegation, Russian delegation, low-level delegation arriving there. US also sent a delegation with Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, Senator Lindsey Graham. I'm not sure why Senator Lindsey Graham is going to Istanbul. Anyways, Putin never came to Istanbul. Zelensky had many ultimatums, tough guy remarks. Nevertheless, Putin just ignored Zelensky. He stayed home to deal with firing a general and to deal with the war, because Russians know that Ukrainians and EU are not serious about ending the war. So Zelensky came to Turkey. He again spoke like a tough guy, that Putin is scared to meet him. So Zelensky sent a location for Putin to meet him in Ankara, but Zelensky says that Putin is scared of him. And Putin did not come to Ankara. Why would he come to Ankara? Why? Why would he come to meet Zelensky when it is obvious that Zelensky does not want to make a peace with Russia? Because again, he's voicing his ultimatums like the 30-day ceasefire ultimatum, and he's also saying that he's not going to recognize any of the regions, basically, and denazification and reduction of Ukrainian military is off the table as well. So all the root causes that the war started for are still being denied by the Ukrainian side. So Zelensky, why would Putin come to meet you? I guess the EU French connection and Zelensky are trying to pin all the blame on Putin, and the reason they're doing this is to get Trump on their team. Isn't that crazy? They're still hoping to fool Trump, to set a trap for Trump so Trump can come to their side and have full sanctions on Russia. They're still talking about sanctions on Russia as they go to Istanbul on this Thursday. Today is Friday now. They are supposed to meet in Istanbul or Ankara, or is it Istanbul now? I'm confused now because there was two places where the Russian delegation went to. I think Ankara, and Ukrainians were in Istanbul, and Americans were somewhere. So it's a whole gong show right now, and Zelensky is the head of the gong show that's happening. It seems like Zelensky has the whole world on their tiptoes, and he's controlling the EU, I guess. But there is reports from RT that the English sent Starmer's advisor to Turkey so he can have background talks with Zelensky to make sure Zelensky doesn't get off the rail and do any more stupid comments that he has made. And the report said the main reason why the UK sent the advisor of Starmer to Istanbul, Turkey, is to make sure that Zelensky stays on the course where he will not disappoint Trump. So the UK are doing everything. This is a UK trap for Trump to get Trump on their side. So the trap is mostly set by and designed by UK for Trump to make sure that out of these negotiations there's no real ceasefire, but that they get to have Trump to finally come on their side with full sanctions on Russia, with full weapon supplies, so they can continue the Ukrainian war. That's their main goal. On the other hand, we have Trump. I think he's realizing the trap. He's negotiating all kinds of deals with the Arabian states, with Saudis, UAE, Qatar. Real deal breaking, I mean, huge deals. He might have a huge deal with Iran, which will be good for US, and Iran supposedly is ready to give up its enriched uranium if US drops the sanctions, and I think that's great. If US and Iran can have a deal, the world will be a better place. The globalists and the EU warmongers, the libtards, they won't get what they wish, which is a worldwide destructive war like the one they ended up doing in Ukraine. So hopefully Trump goes on with the deal with Iran and gets Iran on the same page with US and gets Russia on the same page with Russia. And there is some news with Russia. US just lifted sanctions on a big pipeline that goes from Kazakhstan to Black Sea, which is controlled partially by US and Russian and Kazakhstani oil companies. So this is breaking news, where US is now realizing that being like the EU globetards, libtards, and sanctioning your own country, basically shooting at your own foot, is not a good thing. So it's good news that sanctions were lifted off this oil company that's supplying oil from Kazakhstan to Black Sea, which eventually goes to world markets. Trump lifted this sanction. So it seems like a lot of things are going to change. Sooner or later, we're gonna see more action like this, where U.S. will end up lifting more sanctions off of Russia. And of course, with this, you have EU warmongers with Germany that's saying they're going to have the biggest and the strongest army ever. And like the Duran show reported, and he's good at seeing these details, that what happened the last time we ended up with a very strong German army. We ended up with the fascists in Nazi Germany. So we could have a repeat of this. And also we have the whole globalist globetard EU machine working against Russia, with the Estonians trying to get a Russian oil ship. It was an oil ship that was in the Baltic, that was sailing there, and the Estonians tried to get this ship to go to the Estonian side so they can basically arrest them and take over the ship on the international waters. And the Russians basically send a MiG-35, if I'm not wrong, or a Su-27 to confront the Estonian Navy, which has 8 ships, the big, powerful Estonian Navy. I mean, what a pitiful move from these Estonians. And it looked like that NATO had a warship, an F-16 there, that confronted the Russian jet. But eventually Russians basically told the Estonians to just fuck off, basically. That's what happened. And I think soon we're gonna see Russian military escorting these oil rigs. So don't expect anything from this Ukrainian talks in Turkey. This is not for peace, like I've said many times. This is not designed for peace. This is just another Zelensky move, another comedian move to supposedly fool Trump into believing that Putin is the warmonger, the aggressor, the bad guy, and that US needs to put more sanctions and give more money and weapons to Zelensky. Like $350 billion was not enough. And also there's some developments with Hungary, where the Hungarian army shot down drones over by the border with Ukraine. This is a big deal. And it looks like there is going to be more issues coming up, as Ukrainians, Zelensky doesn't like Orban, because Orban does not support Ukraine. Orban tries to veto any help that goes to Ukraine, military help. And also Orban wants to do a referendum in Hungary to see if the Hungarians want Ukraine in EU. And the dictators in EU obviously don't like democracy. They are trying to do everything to now create some type of chaos in Hungary, as they have their opposition party in Hungary, which is basically, I'm sure, a globalist, Soros-sponsored opposition party that's there to replace Orban when they do a color revolution like they did in Ukraine and in many other countries, in Armenia, where I am right now. And through these revolutions, they end up installing their own puppets. So I think that's what they're trying to do. Not I think, for sure that's what they're trying to do in Hungary as well, is they're trying to install their own puppet government there. The Soros globalist government, which will end up fully being on board with the feminist dictators in EU, Ursula, Kaja Kallas. How do they end up getting all these women in these positions? Have you ever asked yourself, how do they end up getting these feminist women in all these high positions? Why don't we ever get people like Trump, Orban? Why are they so rare? And why are feminist, Soros, leaptard, globalist, evil women in all high positions? That's what my, I guess, question would be, a rhetorical question. It's not really a real question because it's a setup. That's what they do to control us, to take our freedoms, and to build the narrative and to enslave us even more. So don't expect anything good out of these Ukraine talks. The war will continue, I'm sure, and we'll see what happens next after these negotiations anyways in Turkey on this Friday. Thanks.